This is How About That Podcast, a show dedicated to all things Dallas Cowboys. With both objective and subjective perspectives, How About That Podcast is your place to hear about America's team. Now, here's Joseph Hoyt and Danny Morales.
All right, Joey, can you feel that energy, that aura? Can you feel it? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I'm not sure I do, Danny. Or Joe. I just almost called you Danny. Wow, right off the bat. I'm not sure I do, Joe.
Well, great segue, because the aura that I'm talking about is the fact that one, Danny Morales is not here, and I think that could be to your relief.
I mean, I don't know. I just almost called you Danny. I guess I felt it without actually really feeling it. It was something that was subconscious. No, I like having Danny, though. It's good to have someone to laugh at every once in so often.
See, because it's funny you say that, because the people have told me that they believe that there could be a possible rift between Danny and Joey, that is becoming the rivalry of the pod, that, I'm merely just this objective, just kind of watching, kind of guiding force. Meanwhile, you two are the ones duking it out on the battlefield, discussing whether or not Kyren Williams is going to be the best running back in the NFL this year.
That's what the people are saying?
Some are saying they wonder if they enjoy it, but they wonder if the riff is something that could, tangle this weave here,
Yeah. If I ever meet Danny in person, I just won't acknowledge him, won't say hi, won't shake his hand, nothing.
We got to make that happen. Well, all right. Well, yeah, everyone, welcome back to another episode of How About That Podcast. I'm recording from my childhood home here in the San Francisco Bay Area. Because I'm getting ready to then drive to Oregon for my bachelor party, which is going to be very, very fun. Danny will be there. We're going to try to record an episode from Bend, Oregon, where the bachelor party is going to be. Joey, have you been to Oregon before?
Never.
Have you been to California before?
Went to San Diego once for spring break. I wasn't too impressed. It was also raining the whole time in the city that they say always has perfect weather. So that was a little bit of a turnoff. And it's also insanely expensive for a college kid. So now I'm out of college and have a little more money, but I don't plan on going back to California for vacation anytime soon.
Yeah, well, you should check out San Francisco. It's a cool spot. But San Diego, it's wild that you got bad weather, to be honest. You've probably heard that a lot, because it is my favorite place in California. One of my favorite places to visit. Also, as you pointed out, it is literally the most expensive place to live in, according to studies, and not like in terms of like top end like pay. It's cost. It's cost versus how much the average income is in that scenario. And San Diego tops the list. So great spot though.
No, the one day that the weather was good, it was very fun. But the other days, not so much.
Yeah. Well, the weather the other day in Dallas for rookie minicamp was incredible too. It was sunny, not a cloud in the sky, which has been actually kind of crazy, because there's been a lot of storms in Texas and Oklahoma. And, obviously, hearts go out to everyone affected by those tornadoes in Oklahoma. But the weather was nice that day. And it was cool to finally see some of these rookies we've talked about in person, including future Hall of Famer Cooper Beebe.
Hey. You never know. He has a very impressive resume. He doesn't have super long arms, which I think people really knocked him for, and that's why he was a third-round pick. But if you just look at his body of work and what he's done, I get it. But Danny, again, going back to Danny, just appointed him immediately, which is hilarious, because it's Danny, who's a diehard Cowboys fan. I expect nothing less. It's just funny.
But Danny, it's funny because Danny's our pulse of the Cowboy fan, right? And the reason I had him on the podcast is because I think sometimes reporters can't relate to fans, or they struggle to, or they get too caught up in the objective or the minutia of the beat that sometimes it's you don't really understand the mind of a Cowboys fan, which is why I wanted Danny to be the co-host. But it's funny because the whole time so far, Danny has been very depressed about the Cowboys. And I think that's real, though. I think Cowboys fans are and it makes sense anytime you become the first team in NFL history to do something you don't want to do, a la them winning 12 games, 3 consecutive seasons, but failing to make a conference title game in that span, it's interesting. And I think it also makes sense that Cowboys fans are getting a little restless. But I think the Cooper Beebe and Tyler Guyton picks specifically were very exciting for this fan base. And we got to see them this week. One of the things, my big takeaway from the first day of rookie minicamp was, it was something that Mike McCarthy talked a lot about, Joey, was the fact that this rookie class was very, very impressive because of the work that they put in before the start of rookie minicamp. So rookie minicamp is the first day that, the first time coaches are actually able to work with them a little bit, teach them scheme and stuff like that. And I think one thing that Cowboys coaches kind of found was, hey, they're already starting off on lap 2, for example, because guys like Tyler Guyton and Cooper Beebe had been working together with offensive line guru Duke Manyweather. They had also started working together with Brock Hoffman and Dakota Shipley, Cowboys offensive lineman. And what that was able to do was give them some baseline scheme knowledge that they were able to take into their first day. So it's almost like, hey, you're going to have a pop quiz on day 1, but you knew the answers to. So one thing they did on Thursday when they reported to minicamp, even though Tyler Guyton had gotten to Airbnb and had been there for like 2 weeks, he couldn't rest or couldn't wait to get back up here after Jerry Jones flew him back and forth from Austin in the private jet. So one thing that Cooper Beebe and Tyler Guyton did the night before, and some other guys did too, so the night before rookie minicamp, is they did walkthroughs in the hotel ballroom before practice. So they were already doing practice. Guyton and Beebe were quizzing each other on scheme and other things about the playbook before the playbook had even come already. So very interesting thing. I think that there's a reason for Cowboys fans to be excited about this rookie class. Mike McCarthy was very impressed, but specifically, I think the relationship already between Tyler Guyton and Cooper Beebe, 2 guys that the Cowboys are hoping could be pillars of their offensive line, is already something that's impressive, Cowboys fans.
I want to ask, were you at rookie minicamp for the Cowboys last year?
No, because I didn't. This is the kind of the wild thing. I didn't start covering the Cowboys till Monday of week 1.
I thought so. I just wanted to make sure, but I was going to ask, like, how does the way that McCarthy was talking about this rookie class this early on compare to the way he was talking about previous rookie classes?
So I don't know what he said in day 1 of rookie minicamp last year, but one thing I do know is that, and I pointed to this, why I have an article about this, why it was impressive and significant that Mike McCarthy was so positive in his praise of this rookie class. It's impressive because if you go back to the press conference before the draft, and Mike McCarthy, like, obviously he'll give out praise to guys who deserve it, right? He'll say DeMarcus Lawrence is fantastic, because guess what? DeMarcus Lawrence has been fantastic. Aaron Rodgers, great quarterback. What a shocking thing to say, right? But he's also not like overly, he won't give praise to guys where like you question like, oh, that's a little interesting. Like at least not like strong praise. So one thing he said before the draft was the guys that are going to make the most impact on this Dallas Cowboys team are already here. And he was talking about the voluntary workouts that they were doing. He's like, hey, rookies are going to come in behind them. These guys are the ones I'm counting on. I'm not necessarily even counting on the rookies having a super big impact. Obviously, that was before they drafted their starting left tackle in the first round. And that was before they drafted a guy that's going to compete with Brock Hoffman, maybe some other guys for the starting center job. So long story short, but he's like, yeah, I'm not expecting much. And honestly, it was kind of, my reaction was like, oh, it's a little, not like, it wasn't positive about the class. Let's just say that. And now he's talking about how it's one of the most strong impressions he's ever had from a rookie class. So I think that it actually was significant.
Yeah. And I mean, I feel like that run game was, as you and Danny have talked about in the past, one of the biggest areas of need and, change going into this offseason on both sides of the ball. And they kind of addressed that in the first 3 rounds with all 3 of those picks.
Yeah. And, including Marshawn Nealon, a defensive end, the lone rookie not to sign so far, which I wouldn't read too deep into, but just a fact. So, but the reason we're also talking, Joey, about the offensive line of rookies and specifically Cooper Beebe is because we have a fun interview coming up. We've already recorded it with Kellis Robinett from the Witchita Eagle and the Kansas City Star, the Kansas State beat reporter for those outlets. And he gave us some really, really good insight on Cooper Beebe. He told some pretty funny stories. We talk about the Nacho Libre mask that he wore for Halloween, which is very fun. We talk about why it was a little bit surprising that Cooper Beebe fell that far. And we also kind of talked which I thought was one of the more big takeaways, why Cooper Beebe decided to come back and what kind of effect that had this past season on the Kansas State offensive line. So fun interview there. Let's go right into that. All right, now we're going to go to an interview that I'm really, really excited to do. We're going to talk with Kellis Robinett from the Witchita Eagle. Kellis covers Kansas State, does a fantastic job. And, of course, the Kansas State connection to the Cowboys is one, Cooper Beebe, as well as Deuce Vaughn. But today on this pod, we're going to talk a lot about Cooper Beebe, who's kind of quickly become a fan favorite in Dallas without taking a snap, which is kind of impressive. Kellis, first off, how you doing? And welcome to the pod.
I'm doing good. I've never been the biggest Cowboys fan in the world, but now they got Deuce and Cooper. I definitely got a good reason to watch. Those are some really good players.
Awesome. What would be your NFL team? Curious.
Chiefs. Probably not too surprising. They're the closest one up here. But yeah, actually, I grew up in Austin, Texas, and I liked the Houston Oilers until they got ripped away to Nashville. So never embraced the Texans or the Cowboys though fully.
There you go. All right. Well, the Chiefs not a bad team to be a fan of. And Kansas State recently not a bad team to cover too. Kansas State obviously been doing really well. They've come down to Texas a couple of times for the Big 12 championship. A team that a lot of Texans are familiar with, and now we're getting to know really, really well because of Deuce Vaughn and Cooper Beebe. First off, Kellis, the thing with Cooper, played tackle, played guard, now is probably going to be making the move to center. That's where he took snaps at rookie minicamp. Coaches have said, hey, we fully believe in his ability to make that switch. Does that surprise you a little bit that he is going to play center, kind of knowing what he is? Or, one thing that they talk a lot about is his IQ. What do you think about just his ability to kind of take in information and kind of maybe command a huddle and command the line of scrimmage?
Well, it's interesting. I think he can definitely do it. It's funny because every time they moved him at Kansas State on the offensive line, people thought it was a bad idea because he would play left tackle and look amazing. He would play right, then he'd move to right tackle and say, what are you doing? He looks a good left tackle. Well, he's even better at right tackle. Then you move him to guard. What are you doing? He looked great at tackle. He's even better at guard. So maybe this is the final step in that process. They've just been playing him in the wrong spot all this time, and he gets to center, and he's even better. He always joked here that he wished the coaches would play him at center just even for one snap so he could leave saying he played all 5 spots. Never let him do it. There's also a joke that they should throw him the ball on some trick plays, let him score touchdowns so he could do that too. Never got to that. He's just a boring old amazing blocker. But I do think he can play center. He's got a great football IQ, just a very physical player. And if you can play guard and tackle, there's really no reason why you can't play center as well. So, I think he can definitely handle it.
Yeah, one of the things I was kind of looking at in your coverage was you kind of described him as one of the best offensive linemen in Kansas State history. This is a guy, obviously, consensus All-American 2 times in a row. We just talked about the versatility. How would you kind of describe just his playing ability at Kansas State? And kind of, I think one thing that fans they see highlights every once in a while, but one thing that's kind of hard to recognize is how much an offensive lineman truly can stick out. How would you just describe his run at Kansas State from just a playing style and what he was able to do?
Yeah, very, very aggressive player, very smart player. He's one of the few offensive linemen where I think you could make a highlight reel for. Most times those players don't stick out. Fans don't recognize them. But Cooper was the type that there was a few touchdown runs that Kansas State had where they would give it to their running back, and Cooper would get to the second level and just destroy a defensive back or something. And people would be marveling more at his block than the touchdown run. So it was kind of funny. There were a few. It happened at least 2 or 3 times where you would see the highlight later, and you'd say, "Well, is this a running back highlight or an offensive lineman highlight?" Because the block was so good. There was another time I remember pretty vividly where they played Tulane at home, and he blocked a defensive lineman and shoved him so hard that he fell into the guy who was coming behind him. So he effectively blocked 2 players in one move. Not things you see a whole lot of at the college level. And I would just say really what set him apart was just his willingness to do everything. He played on special teams. He played on punt coverage, kickoff coverage. They put him in on defense a time or two just to help out. And he was always effective in some ways. It was just always fun for me to watch from the press box. You could tell he was always the most aggressive guy once he would shed his first block and get out. He was always looking to block and destroy somebody else, and did it a lot of times. And yeah, I have no qualms last year. I think he was the best player on the whole team, and I think you could definitely make a case for him being the best lineman in K-State history.
Yeah, that's impressive. Speaking of impressive, one thing that has already kind of become his like claim to fame here with the Cowboys already. It's kind of funny, as an interior offensive lineman, there's already a lot of coverage and notoriety about Cooper Beebe here. One of the interesting things is this quote he had after the draft where he said, quote, "I like to dirt people." And he kept saying it because at first it kind of sounded like he just forgot a word. Like, I like to put people in the dirt, blah, 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 blah. No, he's like, I dirt people. I like dirt. I like dirting, whatever extension of it you want to do. So that's kind of become his claim to fame. His favorite dirt story was when he basically bench pressed the Houston linebacker to a point where he was like decleated in the open field and had his legs up. It was a good play. Anyways, it sounds like that Tulane one was your favorite Cooper Beebe dirt story. Or do you have another block that like sticks out like, oh man, he quote dirted that guy pretty well?
Those are the two big ones. I also seem to remember they ran a fake punt against somebody, and he just got so far in the open field before he could block someone that by the time he did it, he had such a full head of steam, the guy just had no chance. Things like that. But yeah, definitely the Houston and Tulane were the two biggest ones. But you could go back at any game and just say, boy, this is a really good block from him. It was always a joy to see him being a pulling blocker, because when that happened, you knew he was going to get out into space and create holes for somebody. And I always liked. He had a great quote that always stuck out to me. I was writing a story about Deuce Vaughn here and some of the greatest things he did, and I asked Cooper what he liked best about blocking for him, and he said the best thing was with him. He didn't have to get out in the open field and do that stuff. It was just make one good block at the line of scrimmage, and then trot off the field and get some water because he knew Deuce was taking it to the house. So stuff like that. A lot of football players probably don't think that way, but with him, he kind of knew what he was blocking for and how differently he could do it for guys. And I think that shows how smart he is.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because I think people are not only excited about obviously the Cooper Beebe pick, but they're also excited knowing the Cowboys running back situation about what maybe this could mean for a guy like Deuce Vaughn in terms of getting him on the field a little bit more versatility. They kind of addressed a lot of run blocking stuff with two rookies and Tyler Guyton and Cooper Beebe. So people are really excited about that. I know Deuce Vaughn's excited to have Cooper Beebe in the locker room. One thing that also Cooper has kind of done so far too, and it kind of is adjacent to the dirt people quote, he's just kind of been very personable, very, kind of funny with like, not like trying too hard and, but like still pretty honest. Long story question short, how would you also describe the guy's demeanor? Just, how he was with the media at Kansas State, how, just was he with teammates and stuff like that? It seems like you kind of already hinted at a little bit in that last response.
He was always great with us in the media, always a good quote, always a pretty funny quote, really never held too much back. We asked him one time why he chose Kansas State over Kansas, which was a little, K-State's the better football program, but where he's from in Kansas City is closer to Kansas. So, why pick one over the other? And he had kind of a humorous story about how when he went on the visit to Kansas, some coach there just told him flat up, look, you're probably too good for us. If I were you, I'd go to Kansas State. Who knows? Maybe he was exaggerating a little bit there, but great quote. That's the kind of stuff you get from him. Great background, great info guy, and just seemed like a really good teammate. You never heard anybody say a bad word about him. This is a guy who, a story I would say is one time for Halloween, he was in the locker room really debating what he should go dressed as for Halloween. And he showed his offensive lineman friends that he had found a Nacho Libre costume online. He's like, it's only $25. I think I should get it. And they were like, well, you better. If you don't, I'm buying it for you. So he was like, right after I think Halloween fell on a Saturday. So they played a game, they won it. He went out to Aggieville, the entertainment district here, and all night was walking around bars as a Nacho Libre. How can you not love that? But yeah, that's the kind of guy he is. Fun to be around, fun to talk to, fun to play with. Really can't say anything bad about him.
Yeah, that's it's funny because I saw that circulating the other day and I wanted the backstory of it, but kind of, sometimes on social media, you like see something, you're like, oh, I'll come back to that, and then just kind of forget. And that was one of those instances, but you provided the backstory, so thank you for that. Thing that about him that's kind of stuck out so far is just kind of his build. Last year's Cowboys defensive coordinator Dan Quinn used to talk a lot about how their nose tackle, Jonathan Hankins, just had really wide shoulders, and that he was able to kind of, take up two gaps in that situation or play two gap because of that. I had someone describe Cooper Beebe as a cinder block with a ping pong ball on top of his head.
Okay.
Or as his head. How would you, from just a physical standpoint, does that kind of make sense to you, that like that kind of wide, build is something that kind of sticks out to you, or how would you describe just the way he looked?
I've never thought of it in that way, cinder block with a ping pong ball on top of his head, but yeah, it makes sense. The only critique I've heard about his size is he does have a little bit of short arms. I think that's maybe why he fell. He was a 3rd round pick, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think that's maybe why he fell that way instead of, shooting up. At one time there was a thought maybe he could be like a late 1st round guy, but maybe that's why it didn't happen. But hey, you know what? Sometimes you get steals like that. I don't know. I would just say he's got a great offensive line body. I mean, if he can play tackle and guard and now center, you clearly have the physical tools to do it. I guess what always stuck out to me is he's not like an overpowering guy. Like I've covered offensive linemen before who've been 6'7", 6'8", and it's pretty clear that this guy is making it just because he's huge. That's not Cooper Beebe. I think he's not undersized. He's more average. But he wins with determination, skill, and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Did it surprise you that he was like a late 3rd round or 87th overall?
It did a little bit. I thought he was going to be the first Kansas State player off the board. I thought he would have been a 2nd round guy. So it was a little surprising that their tight end, Ben Sinnott, went first before him to the Redskins. So yeah, a little bit surprised. Like I said, I thought he'd be a 2nd rounder. So a little surprised he went 3rd round. Hopefully that ends up good for the Cowboys.
Yeah, one thing too, now that he's moving to center, or competing to start for center, is just, and you touched on a little bit, it's his ability to kind of pull and get out in space and then obviously deliver hits that way. Center, you still have to pull a lot, and obviously guys like Jason Kelce have made that. Creed Humphrey does a good job of it. Anyways, in terms of his speed and pulling, was that something that always kind of stuck out to you, and just his ability to kind of move and get out there?
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, he was always one of the more fun guys to watch doing that, just because he was really smart, knew where he was going, quick enough to get out in space and stay in front of his runner and everything. And I think the other thing that helps there is he comes from a whole family of offensive line. His dad played O-line at the Division II level, but he did it with some pretty established guys like Willie Fritz, the head coach at Houston now. He was an offensive lineman with him at Pittsburgh State here in Kansas. Arkansas's coach, I forget his name, but their head coach, he played offensive line with him there at Pitt State too. So this is a guy who he has 3 or 4 sons, and his oldest son played offensive line. His youngest son is another offensive lineman at Kansas State. So he comes from a family who's, done this for years and years and years. So I think that football IQ helps out a lot there too.
Yeah, the Cowboys signed former Minnesota tight end Brevin Spann-Ford as an undrafted guy. And it was funny. He's like, yeah, I love to be physical, blah, blah, blah. And I asked him, like, oh, do you like to dirt people just like Cooper? And he's like, yes, because I learned it from his older brother at Minnesota. and everyone's like, oh, wait, we forgot that his brother was a Minnesota Golden Gopher too. So, one thing too about Cooper is just obviously we kind of talked a little bit about it, but deliver big hits. And, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but just what did that do for Kansas State when he would have a big hit? Or, obviously that meant that like things worked out offensively for them and he was probably downfield. But, did that kind of have any like repercussions for them, or did they get excited? Was that something they also were watching? Just like a lot of people were?
I think so. You could equate it a little bit to, when you see a monster hit on defense, fires everybody up and momentum carries over to the next play. It was a little like that. The only exception is that a lot of times when he had just the huge hits, they usually resulted in touchdowns. So the celebration went from, oh boy, what a great hit, to, oh boy, we scored a touchdown. But there were definitely times where he would get out and decleat a guy and it would fire everybody else up. And Kansas State the last couple of years has ran the ball at a really, really high, really prolific rate. And whenever they would see that happen, I think that gave them a lot of confidence. All right, let's give the ball to Deuce again here. Let's give the ball to DJ Giddens, who's their running back now. I think it really just fired everybody up. And, this is kind of a different point, but the people just wanted to be around Cooper and those kind of hits. I know 2 seasons ago when they won the Big 12 and they went to the Sugar Bowl, there was a really big question around the team is how many offensive linemen are going to come back next season? Is Cooper coming back? They had a left tackle who got drafted this season. Is he coming back? They had a right tackle who was considered a fringe NFL guy. And their center, same deal. They all had the opportunity to either go pro, go do something else. Were they going to come back? It was a big question, like how many staying, how many are going? Well, Cooper pretty much called everybody together and said, look, I'm coming back next year. What are you guys going to do? And they all pretty much said, well, if you're coming back, I'm coming back. We want to keep playing with you. So that, maybe that's not exactly what you were going for with that question, but his big hits carried over, and I think it just shows that everybody wanted to stick around and keep playing with him.
Mm-hmm. Was he a captain at Kansas State?
He was a captain.
Sorry.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So clearly had some impact there too. Kellis, was there anything I didn't ask you about Cooper Beebe specifically, or any story that you wrote that you're like, oh, hey man, Cowboys fans should check this out?
You covered it pretty well there. I would just say again, he's a really good guy. I enjoyed covering the last 4 years, getting to know his family. And I would just say that when he he's in it for football, because when he had the choice, like I was just saying, to turn pro or stay in college, he was the guy who definitely was going to get picked. If he'd left last year, he probably would have been third round, just like this season. His family even told him, hey, you're guaranteed money right now. We think you should leave. But he had other goals in mind. He loved Kansas State. He wanted to go into their Ring of Honor. He wanted to be their best offensive lineman ever. I'm sure he has the exact same attitude now. This is with the Cowboys. He wants to be the best center they've ever had. And he's not going to aim low. He's going to aim high. I'm sure he's thinking, I want to be in the Cowboys Ring of Honor, NFL Hall of Fame. I'm sure a lot of players think that way, but with him, everything's bigger. He's going to come in, he's going to work hard, and that's what he's going to shoot for. So even if he doesn't get there, I'm sure he's going to end up being a pretty productive player.
Hey, I'm laughing a little bit because when you're talking about his aspirations, because my co-host is I'm the reporter, he's the diehard fan, right? So we kind of have the reporter and then the fan perspective, pulse of the fan. Anyways, he is already a diehard Cooper Beebe guy. And we joke that he's already fitting Cooper Beebe for his golden jacket in Canton. So what you just said will probably be music to Danny's ears. So he'll love that. All right. Well, hey, Kellis, thank you so much for coming on. You can check out his coverage over at the Witchita Eagle and the Kansas City Star. You can follow him on X, formerly Twitter, at Kellis Robinett. Anything else that we should direct them to, Kellis?
No, you nailed it.
Well, also, Cowboys fans, that's 2 Kansas State draft picks in 2 years. So, long story short, go follow Kellis, because we might be talking to him again next year about some other Kansas State Wildcat coming to Dallas. So, Kellis, thank you so much again, and have a great rest of your day.
All right. Thanks, you guys. Have a good one.
All right. Welcome back to the pod. That was a fun interview with Kellis, who did a great job giving us some insight into Cooper Beebe. Joey, was there a part of the interview that stuck out to you? The thing that stuck out to me, because I think we've heard some stories now about Cooper Beebe, and we've seen the dirt people hits and the quotes and stuff like that. But I thought his ability to be kind of a captain true to the name in terms of, hey, I'm coming back next year. What are you guys doing? And those guys, the rest of the offensive line, being like, yeah, all right, we're coming back too. I thought that was a very interesting kind of picture into something we haven't really talked about with Cooper, and that's just his ability to have an impact on a non-field level. Was there anything that stuck out to you from that interview with Kellis?
It was funny to hear how when he was asked about blocking for Deuce Vaughn, he was like, oh, I know I can just take a break the next play because he's going to take it to the house. I think it's very interesting that they already have that connection, and that could be a future. Obviously, Cooper Beebe's not the only offensive lineman, but having that sort of connection, and if Deuce Vaughn, this isn't a backfield where there's just one bell cow guy. Deuce Vaughn can very well just earn himself some decent usage, some decent carries over the season. That would be a fun little side story in this offense.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think one thing with Deuce is that it kind of allows, long story short, you go to a situation where it doesn't really work out that first year, right? And then they say, oh, hey, by the way, we're bringing one of your best buddies. Or I don't know if they're best buddies. Bring one of your former coworkers that you have a good relationship with to this job. That's going to make anyone excited, or it's going to be a boost for anyone. And I think Deuce could use, not to say that he's been like down, but I mean, I think it'd be natural to think, hey, I was the absolute man in college. I come in, I'm excited to play for the team my dad works for. I'm excited to get on the field. And it just didn't really happen much because the packages and the volume of those packages didn't really allow it last year. So anyways, I think it'll be a boost to him. But yeah, fun interview. Go check out Kellis' stuff. He's done a great job covering Kansas State. And kind of like I said, shoot, Joey, I haven't seen the 2025 draft prospects yet for Kansas State. Haven't dove into that class yet. But shoot, there obviously is a good relationship between the Cowboys scouts and the Wildcats. And it wouldn't surprise me if, for some reason, another Kansas State Wildcat ended up in Dallas. So let's also do some news and notes before we kind of do a very quick schedule preview, which is going to happen on Wednesday at 7 p.m. Central, I believe, on NFL Network. But a couple news and notes. Zay Jones did not sign with the Cowboys. That's a little bit old, but we know that now. He signed with the Arizona Cardinals. One thing I talked about on the pod, I think that a lot of people were like putting 2 and 2 together when Martavis Bryant got released. That like, oh, could this be the white smoke? That means Zay Jones is signing. I never really thought that. Zay Jones, I believe, signed for a 1-year deal, more than $4 million. And that kind of seems to be out of the Cowboys price range. I think that they're cool with the competition they have going in for wide receiver number 3 and 4. But I also wouldn't be surprised if there's a veteran on the cheap that ends up visiting as well and adds more competition to that. So that's one thing to keep an eye on moving forward. Joey, what do you think about their kind of wide receiver situation? I like the ability of Jalen Tolbert to potentially step up, but what do you think?
Seeing the name Michael Thomas out there, that's obviously
what I keep thinking of.
That's the one name that I think everyone sees as the free agent because he obviously had such a good, I think it was like 2019 and 2020 years. But it's been so weird, just like somewhat covering the Saints this past season. It's been really weird. He very clearly did not get along with Dennis Allen or Derek Carr like that. It was clearly a bad, and he was saying that other players were too. No one's come out and been really as outwardly vocal on X or Instagram stories as Michael Thomas has. He went after a reporter, just saying that he's kind of a mouthpiece for the Saints, like executives and higher ups people that are basically trying to like put a bad word in on like other players like him or Marshawn Lattimore. So they're not worth as much in contract negotiations or whatnot. I don't know.
Wasn't that story too? It was kind of about like, hey, this was the end of Michael Thomas's run in New Orleans and it shouldn't have been this way. Wasn't that kind of the main headline? And then they obviously probably quoted sources from.
Yeah, so the columnist was Jeff Duncan of the Times-Picayune, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, and he's one of the most well-known, respected Saints columnist beat writers. He wrote an article basically saying it's time for Michael Thomas and Marshawn Lattimore to I forget the article word for word, but basically it's time for them to go. And here's why.
Gotcha.
And then Michael Thomas called Jeff Duncan a hoe. So that was interesting.
Like the guarding tool, right? That's what you're talking about?
Yeah. So I don't know. That concerns me for teams wanting to bring him in. But at the same time, the Cowboys, I feel like, love this kind of stuff. And he's not too old. Obviously, he's dealt with a bunch of injuries, and that's been his biggest problem since those really good seasons is he's played like not that many games. But getting to this whole long thing about Michael Thomas here, I think he could be a very interesting type of slot guy. Obviously, CD kind of plays wherever, anywhere and everywhere. But with him, Cooks, and I don't know. I guess it depends on how they view Tolbert and Gallup, Tolbert. But yeah, we'll see. There's Hunter Renfrow too, if they want another like gadgety slot guy. But I don't know. I mean, when you have CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks is a pretty solid one, I don't think it matters a whole ton. But obviously, you want to have wide receiver depth because you never know.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too about that, it's a good point. Just because they don't sign another veteran guy now doesn't mean that hypothetically, if you needed depth that you wouldn't go out and sign one in the middle of the season. So hypothetically, if a Cowboys receiver gets hurt and they're like, oh, shoot, we're a little bit thin now. Part of me thinks that a guy a la Michael Thomas might be available then too, if you really wanted to bring him in, right? So, and the thing about Renfrow, I like Renfrow a lot, and I think that would make sense. But I also don't think they necessarily need it because I think that I have high kind of hopes is not the right word. I have high objective expectations for Kevontae Turpin as a receiver. I think for some reason, and I'm responsible for this too. It's people forget about him, to be honest, and they kind of typecast him as only the receiver or only the kick returner guy. And I think we need to keep in mind that this is a guy that has explosive ability. You know, the play against the 49ers earlier that game where he had a nice corner route, touchdown, kind of had some separation. That was a play I'm like, oh, you know, Terp could be a legit receiver option. So I think one thing we're going to have to watch is his development too, alongside Jalen Tolbert, Jalen Brooks, Ryan Flournoy. So that'll be interesting to see. All right, quickly, Joey, let's dive into the opponents the Cowboys have, and we'll talk about some potential storylines for the schedule release, which comes out Wednesday. And note, the full schedule comes out Wednesday, but they are starting to trickle out some matchups. For example, this morning on Monday, May 13th, early, they announced that the first game is going to be Chiefs-Ravens, which should be a banger. So that should be a good one. Let's quickly go through the opponents. The home, so you know the NFC East teams, obviously. The New York Giants, Philadelphia Eagles, Washington Commanders. Cowboys will play home and away against them. At home, they'll also play the New Orleans Saints, speaking of Michael Thomas's former team. They play the Tampa Bay Bucks. They'll play the Detroit Lions, the Baltimore Ravens, the Cincinnati Bengals, and the Houston Texans. We'll come back to them. Away teams, the NFC East teams. Then they'll also go back to San Francisco again for the third straight year. Starting to kind of feel like, you know, San Francisco is just going to be something that's always on their mind. And then they go to Atlanta, which I think is an interesting one. They go to Carolina again for the second straight year. They go to Cleveland and they go to Pittsburgh. So two tough AFC North teams there too. Joey, just kind of hearing those opponents, anything stick out to you right away?
One most certainly sticks out, and that's the Detroit Lions, just because of the way that game ended last year. All the hoopla. The Lions, I think, played like the better team for most of that game. I think it was the first quarter, the Cowboys offense really couldn't get going. And then they had that one huge kind of fluky play with CeeDee Lamb that helped Dallas really get things going. The Lions are going to be pissed. They're going to be pissed. They're going to want to beat Dallas. I know that for sure. So that should be a super fun game. I think so. That's the one that sticks out the most. And if we want to talk about Cowboys having a test to see how they really do this next season, they have 3 great games with Lions, Ravens, and 49ers. Those are all 3 teams that were in the conference championships. Not a super easy schedule. Obviously, there's some easier matchups depending on how, you know, the Commanders and Giants and whoever else play out, but they have some real tests in the regular season to see what they're all about.
Some real tests. I think the Lions is a great call as a team to watch, because the thing about the Lions, and it's funny because that game last year was the first time where because remember at the end of last season, they went to Buffalo. That was a complete stinker for the Cowboys. They then went to Miami, and they had a chance to win that game. Dak Prescott led a good drive to end it, but then the defense couldn't stop Miami from eventually having the game-winning field goal. So you start wondering, God, is this Cowboys team going to struggle again in the playoffs? And then they beat that Lions team in that way, and I was like, oh, especially if they get home, if they win the NFC East and get home field advantage for a while, this is a team that could go to an NFC championship. Obviously, that didn't happen. But that game gave me a lot of confidence about them. The one thing with the Lions I think is interesting, you brought up the CeeDee Lamb broken play, huge. I think it was like an 80-yard touchdown, something incredible, right? What do we know about the Lions, what they did this offseason? They added a lot of corners. First 2 picks, I believe, or maybe they had another pick in there somewhere between, but they got Ennis Rakestraw from Missouri in the second round. And then they drafted Terrion. They traded with the Cowboys to come up and get Terrion Arnold, who might have been one of the, whether it's him or Quinyon Mitchell, we're talking one of the best corners in the draft. So I think that's an interesting game. The game you didn't talk about that we also need to talk about is another team on the up and up, and that's the Houston Texans. Went out and got two guys who I think are going to really add to that offense, and Joe Mixon and Stephon Diggs, of course. I'm curious to see what CJ Stroud does in year two. You hear all the time about the second year kind of readjustment, second year struggles for a lot of guys who impress as rookies. I don't think that's going to be CJ Stroud, but it'll be interesting. And I don't think it'll be CJ Stroud, one, because I think he's really good, and two, because they have so many weapons around him. The fact that Nico, like we talk about trios of receivers, Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins, and Tank Dell. I think people forget, by the way, Joey, that Nico Collins was top 10 in receiving yards last season.
1,200 receiving yards.
Yeah. I mean, he had 1,100 against in that one game. And I'm trying to, he had one really big game where I think he had like 200 yards. But anyways, he's a stud. So Joe Mixon also gives them something they didn't have last year, which was a running game. So I think that's a team that's going to be one to watch. Obviously, Stephon Diggs, brother of Trayvon Diggs. That would make a lot of sense as a Thanksgiving game. Let's just bring all the families together, right? But one thing that the Cowboys don't need to do is they don't need to have a really good opponent on Thanksgiving because that's going to draw anyways. They usually actually do, though, which is interesting, except for last year. So I'm very curious to see who the team is that gets the primetime Thanksgiving matchup with them. And we'll see. If it's Diggs versus Diggs, that's fun. Joey, do you have any siblings?
I have two older sisters.
Two older sisters. Have you ever gone one-on-one in routes against them? And who's winning that matchup?
In routes, I have not. I would win that matchup, though. I have no doubt in that. I should say, sorry. They never played football. They never really had an interest for football.
Did you play football?
And up until 8th grade, I was a smaller guy. I wasn't gonna do it in high school, huh?
Did you play receiver?
No. Funny enough, I played fullback and outside linebacker, but I wasn't a big guy. I was all over the place. I don't know. Not much of a prolific football player, to say the least.
So you were basically Micah Parsons meets Hunter Lipke. Is that what you were?
Yeah, basically a little hybrid in between the two. More Micah Parsons, but
that's like, dude. I know you talked in the pre-draft process, but your least favorite thing is comps, and I push back on you. Come on, that's what the draft process is. Blah 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 blah. But the one comp thing that I hate from the draft process is when we start saying like combo comps, where it's like, oh, this guy is Deebo Samuel meets DK Metcalf meets Tyler Boyd meets Jamar Chase. You know what I mean? When you start doing that, where I'm like, have you ever seen the famous picture of David Montgomery from Iowa State? When they're like, he has like the feet of like Barry Sanders. He's got the power of Jim Brown. It's just like David Montgomery's solid back. I think that he would tell you, even at Iowa State, like, bruh, that was a little bit too much for me.
And I don't hate comparisons. I just hate unrealistic comparisons. Byron Murphy being compared to Aaron Donald. Come on. I mean, Byron Murphy's excellent. He could be one of the best defensive tackles in the NFL. Cool. But Aaron Donald, there's other defensive tackles out there that are really good.
Okay, but how many are more small like that and kind of built like that? I mean, Javon Hargrave, but I don't think Byron Murphy plays like Javon Hargrave.
He just plays,
you know what I mean?
Game wrecker.
Yeah, but Hargrave's more of like a pass rush guy. So interesting. All right, one thing I also want to point you guys to, and one thing I got to do a better job of, please sign up for the subtext where you can text with me and we can do. I give you updates on the Cowboys. So, when the schedule comes out, we'll send a subtext out, all that stuff. Please subscribe to this pod, review it, rate it. We have a couple days till the Taco Bell challenge push ends. One thing I want to tell you on that, if we don't get our goal, I'm going to do a mile no matter what. And for every 500 downloads that we have, I'm going to add a Taco Bell item to it, which actually, this might be a bad precedent to set, because if for some reason the world lights on fire and this podcast gets 15,000 downloads in the next day, I might be eating a lot of Taco Bell items, but we'll see. So anyways, do that. Check out LoneStarLive.com with all our content. One thing I want to tell you guys is I'm at rookie minicamp. I traveled to all road games last year except one due to a conflict I already had. That was Carolina anyways, come on. we're putting a lot into this. Me and Joey are writing a lot of stuff about the Cowboys. So please check that out. One thing I want to point you guys to, we're doing a new series, basically pinpointing the best offensive players, defensive players, and rookies. So the way we're doing it is, who are the 15 best offensive players the Cowboys are going to face in 2024? Who are the 10 best defensive players? And who are the 5 best rookies? So the Cowboys, we already put out the offensive list, the beginning part 1. And then, Joey, I'll just read it to you because it's already out there. Honorable mention, Amari Cooper, obviously old friend from Cleveland. Atlanta guard Chris Lindstrom, your guy. Falcons are going to want to run the ball against Dallas, so why not have the number 1 guard there? Jahmyr Gibbs, speaking of running the ball, I think Jahmyr Gibbs is he's a guy I think is just going to have a big year too. And, I think he's shown that potential. Very curious to see about his trajectory. And then I have Nico Collins, speaking of Houston, and Joe Mixon. And then here's kind of the one that was tough. And I'll be honest, part of the reason was I didn't want to have too many 49ers in the top 15 because if you look at it, there's going to be a lot. I put Deebo Samuel as an honorable mention because I think Deebo is not the 2021 Deebo that lit the world on fire. Second world on fire reference. Maybe that's telling me something about my mental health. But I don't think he's just in between injuries, a little lapse in production. Brandon Ayuk getting a little bit more center stage in that offense. Not the same guy I think he was, even though he could be a top 15 player on that list. So that's interesting. And then number 15, I have Stephon Diggs. 14, Frank Ragnow from Detroit, who might have retired. Or, he was thinking about retiring. Didn't. He's coming back. But has been one of the best interior offensive linemen. And especially in that Lions run game, I think that's going to be something to watch. And then I have Bijan Robinson, which is kind of in the Jahmyr Gibbs mold of projecting a little bit. Obviously Tyler Algier is there too. But I think with a new regime, Bijan Robinson can take a second-year jump. 4.6 yards per carry last year. Also had 58 catches, which I think for some reason kind of people forget about. 8 total touchdowns. I expect those numbers all to increase in 2024.
Bijan and Jahmyr, I think that's going to be a fun little. Once the McCaffreys and Chubbs are gone from the NFL, those 2 are going to be the 2 guys of just who's the best running back in the NFL. I think Breece Hall deserves some decent discussion in that too. But those 2 guys came in and they both did a really good job. Bijan obviously not as much just because he didn't get the ball a ton in some games, but I think there's a very valid argument to make that either one of those 2 guys can be the best running back in the NFL once CMC decides to hang the cleats up.
Jahmyr Gibbs is interesting to me because he's a guy that was he hurt in the beginning of the season? He kind of didn't pop back on the radar until I feel like mid-season.
No, he wasn't hurt, but Dan Campbell was he was adamant, we're just going to kind of ease him into this. Right. And David Montgomery was getting 30 carries a game, and everyone was just where is this Jahmyr Gibbs guy that you just drafted 12th overall, a running back that you drafted 12th overall? You're not even using him yet?
It kind of, though, and we're going to get off after this, but it kind of worked out because I think I just remember watching that NFC Championship game, and I was like, man, Jahmyr Gibbs looks like he has another level of speed right now than the 49ers defense. They looked gassed. He looked fresh. And maybe that was their game plan all along the whole season. Let's ride David Montgomery, and then let's use Jahmyr Gibbs as our NOS boost. And we're going to hit the NOS at the end of the season and just spurt on this running game. So interesting. All right. Well, stay tuned for all that more coverage. Schedule release comes out Wednesday. We're going to have some thoughts on that. Danny and I will give thoughts on that probably from Bend, Oregon for my bachelor party. So I'll be a little bit offline a little bit, but stay tuned for the podcast. Check out all the coverage. We're going to have all the reactions to the schedule there. And that's going to be great. Oh, Joey, one thing. Should we wait to brainstorm the end of the pod for Danny to get here? We're trying to find a better uniform end of the pod thing. And we have what's on Morales' mind, but a way to actually put a period on the podcast. Should we wait to brainstorm that?
I think so. Danny will have some good ideas to theoretically give.
Well, and some. All right, well then we're going to end it right there. Thank you, everyone, and tune in again next time.
Thanks for listening to How About That Podcast.